Hi, this is your Swapnil Bharti, and we are here at KubeCon and CloudNetiCon in Atlanta. And today we have two Matts, Matt Butcher, co-creator of Helm and CEO of Fermyon, and Matt Farina, one of the Helm's co-maintainer and distinguished engineer at SUSE. Matt, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
First of all, this KubeCon, what I'm hearing from people is that the layout, the way they have laid out the booths, there's no impact on traffic despite flight cancellation, despite shutdown, traffic is same, and the way the whole event has been structured, people have time to talk to each other. They don't have to shout over each other. So I want to hear from your perspective, how has been this conference so far before we jump into Helm?
I noticed right away that the layout they have for the show floor is just really conducive to having good conversations. It's organized a little bit differently. There's plenty of space between booths this time. And the venue, the acoustics in the venue are a little bit better. So usually by the second day, my throat is just killing me and I can barely speak. And this time hasn't been a problem at all. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, I remember from London, you're struggling to talk with the end of the day. What has been your experience?
Yeah, I immediately noticed the sound. Instead of having to raise my voice and be loud, I can have conversations with people right there. And there's enough space where you can, grab some people, go to the side, outside of all the conversations around you, and have, a nice, steady conversation with people without feeling like you're yelling or wanting to escape this room in order to get some peace and quiet, which, has made it easy to find people because they're up for staying in here and mingling with each other and introducing to each other. So I think it's gone really well.
Now let's talk about Helm 4. It's a first big release. Also, a lot of things have changed in like everybody is talking about AI these days. So we'll talk about it, the timing, the feature. Sometimes these projects are kind of microcosm of the bigger, larger ecosystem where the industry. So I want to hear from you, how do you look at Helm 4?
I'll do timing, you take features. Because I think, when we started Helm at the same time Kubernetes was just getting going. We introduced it at the very inaugural KubeCon. Helm 1, the transition from Helm 1 to Helm 2 was a matter of months. I mean, we were just moving so fast. We were figuring out how to build things, and we were just very nimble at that point. But also, everybody in Kubernetes was exploring. We weren't running Kubernetes in production back then. But then that difference from Helm 2 to Helm 3 was a matter of 3 years, I think it was. 3 years between when Helm 2 came out and Helm 3 came out. And that was sort of reflective of that period where Kubernetes itself was sort of starting to settle into a rhythm, get its own cadence. And developers were and DevOps were sort of learning what patterns they were going to build and how they were going to do things. So there was a longer period there. The difference from Helm 3 to Helm 4, it's been 6 years since Helm 3 was released. And I think the number one reason for that has been that Helm has sort of found its niche in the Kubernetes ecosystem as just a stable piece of the toolkit. I think the research I've seen most recently said 70% of Kubernetes users use Helm. And so we've got this sort of like, on one hand, an obligation to make it stable and reliable and not surprise people too frequently, right? And so, and on the other hand, the ecosystem itself sort of has landed in that stable cadence where the Kubernetes is not changing at the velocity it used to be. And so you take those two things together and you see why having a little bit of a longer duration between major releases is actually pretty good for the ecosystem. And people know what they've got to work with. They don't have to change things frequently. It saves time, it saves money. And yet we hit that point where it was time to build a new version and time to make some big changes.
During Kubernetes or during Helm v3's life cycle, right, we added new features constantly in minor versions. But there comes to a point where there's some things you want to do that you can't quite do with the current architecture, the internals of it, right? And that's one of the things we take very seriously is we don't want to break anybody because, as you said, there's just so many people who are using Helm. If you break it, they're going to know, they're going to find you, they're going to get frustrated. That's the thing we don't want to do. And so we've been very conscious to not break them, but that means there's things we want to do we haven't been able to do. And after 6 years, kind of enough of that built up, we said, all right, let's do a major version and give ourselves the ability to start doing those new things. And so some new features are coming out in Helm 4, but we also changed some of the internals to enable us to keep adding new things during the Helm 4 timeframe, features that we've wanted to do for a while, but haven't been able to. But we do have a number of nice new features in Helm 4. And one of them even plays really well into the space Matt's in now, right? So Helm has plugins where you can extend it. And for a long time, it was that kind of simple model like Git has, where it executes onto the file system. But we've seen this growth in terms of, a number of file systems and architectures that you're running things off. And, you've got Windows, Mac, Linux, and then you've got all these various architectures, especially under Linux, that you might run something on. And if you're going to do a plugin and extension, a lot of times you've got to build it for each one of these OS and architectures, and people aren't doing that. And so we've kind of got this disconnected ecosystem of plugins. So we wanted a way to just have plugins where you could build it once and run it in all these places. And something that works really well for that is WebAssembly. WebAssembly isn't just for the web, it's being used all over the place. And so in Helm version 4, we actually have WebAssembly-based plugins. So you can write it, build it once, and then run it for all these Helm users everywhere, because we're hoping to grow that extensibility ecosystem in that way. And so that was one of the big features that landed. Another thing that landed that will actually be coming soon is charts, right? The chart package hasn't had massive changes for a long time, this package you install into the Kubernetes clusters. But we've wanted to make some big changes, we just haven't been able to. So we kind of did some refactorings, and we are going to have a new chart major version to come out sometime probably in the next year, where people can start playing and do some new interesting things with it. We're going to continue to support all those charts that have been there, but now we have the ability to bring some new features and ideas in. And so that's another big change that hit Helm that'll be coming in the coming years, but we enabled it through the changes we did in Helm 4.
And when you're talking about not breaking things, it reminded me of Linus Torvalds, because he always said Linux should never break things for user no matter which version we are running. So it's like the same kind of philosophy, that just because the new versions. Can you also talk about the timeliness of this release?
Helm was started in October of 2015. That's when you had that first commit. You first announced it at the very first KubeCon 10 years ago. So there's a certain timeliness to this in saying, it's 10 years of Helm. It's 10 years of these KubeCons. And it just fit very nicely to have a Helm release to go along with that 10 years, to celebrate it, to go along with it, because Helm is one of the very first CNCF projects, right? It was under Kubernetes. And then when the CNCF said, we're going to have more than Kubernetes underneath it, it was an opportunity for Helm to grow alongside the CNCF. We've been around for 10 years now. And so the timeliness works, very nicely with this evolution of the CNCF.
I think in a lot of ways, Helm sort of grew up in parallel to Kubernetes, to CNCF, to KubeCon, to the whole sort of idea of cloud native and how that was going to work out over time. So it certainly is fun to get to sort of like share these anniversary dates and do a big release. And for me, I've been less involved in Helm now than I was 5 years ago or so. Matt has taken the helm with Helm, I guess, taking the rudder with Helm. I don't know how you steer a boat. And so in many ways, I haven't contributed code in 3 years. I haven't actively done a whole lot of it. And so I like the fact that this particular moment is sort of like, in some ways, sort of a changing of the guard in Helm itself. And that is a story that I think is a big success story anytime it happens in open source, right? So often people will get enthusiastic, they'll build something, it'll work, people a community will adopt it. And then as people's interests change and their careers change and they go start companies or they retire or things like that, the project will languish and then eventually die, and you leave behind disappointed users, and it's a costly exercise. And to have, we spent a lot of time in Helm, around Helm 3, trying to figure out how to roll some maintainers off and roll in new maintainers. And Matt was the champion of it then. And I think this is like the big success story, is that, almost, I think Matt might be the only one who contributed code to both Helm 1 and Helm 4. And in that way, he's brought on this whole new cadre of developers who have trained up and brought in more people from the community. And it's just one of those true open source success stories where you see a project taking care of not only the source code, but the longevity. And I think we have a pattern that will last us on indefinitely into the future. And as long as Kubernetes is a thing and people still want package management for Kubernetes, the Helm project will be able to continue on this sort of strong trajectory.
So you are the variable and he's the constant.
Yeah.
Which is also...
that is a very good way of describing us.
Yeah. Which is also, I think, a kind of blueprint how open source projects should be done. That because creating an open source project, putting in the foundation is the easy part. Yeah. But the sustainability, because a foundation can do only so much. It can provide you with all the resources. Yeah. But if you don't have folks that take over the Helm and take it to the next stage without depending on the original creator, that is the actual story. And this is the story. Open source is less about the code, it's more about people. And so this is the story, which is the real celebration, versus of code will be developed, people will keep going. So can you also share, Matt, from your perspective that, and I will get your perspective as well, depending on which Matt I'm talking about, that what vision you had in mind when you're creating Helm, that you already had in mind that, no, I don't want to be the person who will be responsible from release 1 to the last release. This is how I'll build it. So other people will come, take over. So the project is not dependent on me. And that is very important for open source.
Yeah, when we first started it, I was working at a company called Deus, which was a small company, got acquired less than a year later by Microsoft. And we had been doing open source development for a long time. And we had this theory that when you first started a new open source project, it was very critical to try and get a small group of people aligned on a vision and have them be very productive in fulfilling sort of the first iteration of that vision. And we had this circle metaphor. So it was like the first time you're doing this, you're forming a little circle and you're all looking inward at each other and saying, are we pursuing the same vision? Are we building a cohesive piece of software? Are we following the right coding practices? And then at some point you release this thing out into the world. And the metaphor we would use was, at that point, everybody facing inward on the circle needs to stop and turn and face outward and say to other people, hey, come in and help us build this. And let's build something together. And we got this idea. If you like this idea, come and form another concentric ring around this circle and we'll start working on it together. And then after that, you've just trained up your second tier of contributors. Matt came in, I think it was the first external contributor on Helm, and others, started contributing there. And then the circles sort of shuffle a little bit, and then you start to have this outer ring that functions as like the initial community, the evangelists, the ones who are bringing new people into the Slack channel or helping people open their first issue queue. And then the inner ring can turn inward again and say, it's time to build Helm 2, right? How do we do that? What's our cohesive vision? And you create this sort of structure that is both simultaneously bringing community in and still keeping that focus and keeping the vision, on track and moving forward. And that was kind of our original, we used to whiteboard this kind of thing. And I think that's kind of how it's played out. Would you agree? Has it been augmented over time? What would you say?
Yeah, I haven't heard you describe the model like that before, but I think that's sort of what happens. If you look at the people who built Helm 1 and the people who built Helm 2 and the people who built Helm 3 and even the people who built Helm 4, we've had a lot of turnover in people over time and a lot of change, but we've actually kept that same core vision.
Yeah.
Right? And we are always trying to bring in new people and build them up. Just in the last week, we got a new maintainer, somebody who's worked their way into being a maintainer and a heavy contributor to just everything we've been doing in Helm. And so we're always constantly looking, how do we bring people in? Because we know careers change, families change, priorities change.
Yep.
There's all this change. And we wanted to build something strong. And by doing that, Helm, because it's able to stay around, has become a building block for so many other things, right? You can think of the CNCF of, Argo and Flux. We use it in numerous things like Fleet at SUSE. It's used all over the place now. And so you want to keep that around, because if you don't, it breaks other things. But because we've been able to handle that turnover by training up new people, getting people excited, we've been able to show we can build something that's dependable over the long haul.
Now, this is going to be like it's not old guard versus new guard, but the vision that you had back then when you wrote, and the vision that you have, I mean, one of the code mentors for the future generation. What are the similarity? Because the workloads have changed, the ecosystem has changed, the market has matured. So what is the contrast?
I mean, that's a funny one because Matt and I have worked together even prior to Helm. And we built a package manager together for the Go ecosystem before, building a package manager for the Kubernetes ecosystem. And so I think in some ways we were sort of automatically aligned when we got going. If you're going to build a package manager, this is what it means. You have to have a package format. You have the following verbs you have to support. This is how you maintain something over time. And I think, and many of the other core contributors that were in the early Helm community also had backgrounds from package managers. And so early on, I think there was a strong alignment. I think there was a danger that we hit maybe 8 months into the project where the tyranny of the shiny hit, right? And it was like, oh, we could be a package manager and pull in some configuration management. We could be a package manager and pull in just a little bit of monitoring. And we started down that path and then sort of had one of those moments where we said, oh, we got to correct this, right? And so when Helm 3 came out, a big part of the driver behind that was to say, let's make it really clear. Let's reassert again that we're going to stick to this particular vision. And then, that was about the time, we talked about that inner circle, outer circle thing. That was about after Helm 3, I kind of went from the inner circle of one of the contributors and moved to the outer circle and spent more of my time talking to the community and doing a little more of the we wrote a book about Helm and stuff like that. Whereas Matt really took the leadership role of that inside circle. And I don't know, would you say, things have changed, right? Kubernetes has changed, the pieces have changed, but would you say the core vision still remains the same?
I'd say the core vision really is the same. It's about package management. And, there's that separation of concerns out there. And if you try to take on too many concerns, you're not going to do any of them well. And so by staying in that package management concern, it means there's all these, how many configuration managers are there around Kubernetes? There's GitOps, there's Helm file, there's all these different things out there you can do for configuration management. And I think AI is even taking some of that and, spinning it on its head. But by staying focused on that package management piece, we've been an enabler for all of these other things without competing, which means we played really well in the ecosystem and we can really focus on our one problem and trying to do that well.
So it's more about saying no to a lot of things versus saying yes to everything.
We say no to a lot of things just so we can stay focused. And we're more than happy to listen to somebody. You want to do this in configuration management? Here's a project over here you can do it with. Instead of trying to take it on, we'll direct people to the thing that fits them.
And I think that the thing that has changed the most was the sort of breadth of tooling and techniques around Kubernetes, right? Early on, I had envisioned the average Kubernetes cluster being maybe 5 nodes. Now we've got some that are in the thousands. I envision the average Kubernetes team being 3 people, and the average Kubernetes team now is probably in the 20s or 30s. And I know there are some that are just absolutely massive. And then, GitOps as a workflow became a thing. CI/CD went through some major transformations. The security model in Kubernetes completely changed from the beginning to end. So all of those things changed. And I think the challenge then was to keep the vision going the same way while adjusting expectations about how security was going to work and adjusting expectations. So there's an art of keeping the vision that's not merely saying no to the things that shouldn't be in there and yes to the things that should, but also looking out at what's happening in a little more of a broader scope and saying, oh, well, the assumptions we made here are dying off. So we need to start encouraging people to move this direction by making it easier for the software to do those kinds of things. And we hit challenges like that from Helm 1 to Helm 2, from Helm 2 to Helm 3, and now I think from Helm 3 to Helm 4. And I think a lot of, Matt talked about logging as one of the big features. Logging sounds like a really boring feature, but logging is an alignment feature, right? It's the kind of thing where if you can bring your product into line with all the other products out there, you're shaving time off the average DevOps workflow. You're making it a lot easier for people to diagnose problems that spans, sort of these complex clusters that we have today. So I think there's a lot of art, not just craft, but a lot of art to kind of keeping your eye out on the road ahead and moving the vision in. One of the things that excites me most about Matt's leadership and the rest of the Helm 4 team has been that they understood that, and they put the time in to really think through and carefully describe these features as and before they really built these features. And that, I think, is what makes Helm 4 really compelling.
Talk about how are those changes also aligning with where enterprises are heading with the whole platform engineering, SRE, and now AI workloads. So you're while staying, the vision is same, the road is straight, but it's a curvy road.
And this leads right into your wheelhouse, I think.
I think, taking Helm down that path means actually playing in those ecosystems, being in the AI ecosystem, doing GitOps, working with the CI/CD systems that are out there. And as you use them, you can see where they're going, and then you can make sure Helm is aligned. In fact, many of the people who work on it now work for various companies that are in this space, and they're saying, you know what? We need Helm to fit better over here and over here to play well in where everything's going. Let's bring these new features in. Let's bring these changes in. Let's document these workflows here to play in each of those ecosystems. So when you look at the maintainers from the various companies, they are where things tend to be going. So we can make sure Helm lines up with all of that.
Are there also the way ecosystem is moving, new workloads are emerging? What are some of the new challenges that are emerging that, they do make you sweat, where you're like, no, we do have to fine tune, realign a bit? What are those? It could be CI/CD, it could be complexity. What are those?
Yeah, a lot of it is turning Kubernetes into a platform, and the explosion in the way CRDs are used. That has been managing those and dealing with those has been a challenge, because they were kind of designed to be like kernel extensions to Kubernetes. But we've exploded in the way that they're used. And you can take, something like Crossplane, which has thousands of them that can be installed and hundreds that are installed. How do you play in these kind of ecosystems where you've got lots of CRDs, which are cluster wide, and you don't want to impact, the big thing with all of this is stability. You don't want to break or impact people in a negative way. So how do you do that well? How do we not take down somebody's production environment? That's a big thing. And where are the volatile parts of Kubernetes, and how does Helm touch those?
I think one of the most exciting moments for me was when we started building Helm charts to launch serverless WebAssembly into Kubernetes clusters, because those were two problems that had always been worlds apart in my mind. The new thing Fermyon's doing, the thing we did back in Deis with Helm, and to see the flexibility and power inside of Helm make it possible we didn't even have to adapt anything. Right? It just worked with the new stuff that we were building because of the CRD system inside of Kubernetes. So I think that's one of the testaments to both Kubernetes and Helm as far as how they've evolved over time, is that as new things arise, there are times when we have to make tweaks here and there, but largely as new things arise, they just continue to work. It's just the way the system works.
What is the vision that you have for next iteration of Helm? Looking at where we are, technologies emerging, workloads emerging, use cases emerging.
So I would say where things are going is we set Helm 4 up so we can continue to add features and kind of shape where it's going. And so we're looking at how can we better install things into clusters and better manage them? And that's one of those things we're now going to iterate on. So I think the near term is saying, how can we take what Helm does and do it better for the workloads that are out there? We used to have very simplistic things where you install, one thing maybe with a couple dependencies, and we got into umbrella charts. And now you've got more complicated things being installed. And while Kubernetes is supposed to be just deploy it and let everything reconcile, we know sometimes you've got to do ordering and other little nuances to it. How do we enable Helm to make those nuances easy so these bigger and more complicated things can really be installed and installed very easily?
To build on that a little bit, we have cloud native, as it describes sort of a set of patterns that are always sort of changing and growing. The way that we use CI systems, the way that we started with microservice applications and have sort of built our way into these multi-part sort of conglomerate applications. And there's complexity keeps going up as far as what we can do. I think Helm's big challenge going forward will be to become the tool to manage some of that complexity. So I don't know how we're going to do it, right? I think Matt's got ideas. Other contributors to Helm have ideas of how we can iterate on the chart format and things like that. But the next major phase in Kubernetes is going to be dealing with the complexity that we've created in order to build a more sophisticated set of applications moving forward, the kinds of applications that enterprises will be running out decades and 20 years and so. So I think that's going to be our big challenge. I think already Helm 4 is set, has sort of set the path a little bit in opening up some flexibility that wasn't there before. And it's going to be one of those things that we learn by experimenting a little and then pulling back and then experimenting in a different way. But we've got some years to do that. And I'm really excited about the foundation that the Helm team has set for that.
Matt, thank you so much for joining me. And of course, congratulations on 10-year and next 500 years. It was great to talk to you both. And I look forward to chat with you again. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you for having us.